explain in layman's terms, maybe to a White Rhino client, for example, how new decisions are actually made in the brain when we are exposed to advertising signals and messages?
Okay, this is the sort of the business version of it.
I thought I'd put you between the two clinicians.
Right.
So you're on the spot to answer this in a very cerebral way, Dan.
Feel free to tear it apart. The way that we like to talk about it is that when somebody is processing any piece of marketing, any piece of content, let's say you're looking at an ad, what happens is in the brain, the first thing that happens is it's processed by the amygdala. And the amygdala is sort of the oldest part of your brain. It's kind of the lizard brain. And its purpose is to protect us from harm. And so what it does is it consults with the limbic brain. Now the limbic brain is basically a file cabinet stored of memories and feelings and smells and all kinds of things. And it checks with the limbic brain to say, does this ad remind me of anything that could be a threat to me in any way? And if the answer is yes, there could be something there that's a threat, then it stops being processed. And this is all happening, by the way, in a split second. You're not even aware of it. It's in the subconscious. And the amygdala will stop it from going any further. However, if it sees it to be safe, it will then move it on to the executive brain, the prefrontal cortex, where that's where it will be processed. And as marketers, we like to say, you want to be in the executive brain. That's where you need to be. So that's the simple way of explaining it. And what you need to know as a marketer is being very careful not to trigger distrust through the amygdala. And that's why we want to learn a lot about the audience that we're targeting. So if we understand what makes them tick psychologically, we can avoid some of the triggers that will cause them to shut down.
So Joel and Manuel, how's this sounding to you guys? Anything else you want to add in terms of what's happening inside that brain when we're exposed to images and advertising messages?
I think it's reasonable. I would add, one of the classic ways of thinking about the brain was, maybe I'll start with kind of talking about perception, how we experience the world. And I'm going to invite you all to join me in a little bit of play because it's easier to show with kind of an actual brain model. So I come armed. All right. So let's just say that this is your brain, right? This is your right hemisphere. There's a mirror image of it on the left, right? So you've got your frontal lobe, you've got your parietal lobes, which are usually kind of related to kind of visual spatial awareness, and the back part here is your occipital lobe, kind of back over here, which is all vision. So as you are, let's say I'm looking at this plant here, light goes into my eyes, travels through the optic nerve, goes to the back part of the brain, and what we used to really think was that it goes from that back part of the brain to the temporal lobe, kind of memory areas, and you kind of cross-reference and say, I've seen this before, this is a tree. What we've begun to realize in science is that there's a lot more than just, I see the plant, tie it to the vision of a plant. Actually, we're incorporating all of our senses. So as I'm looking at this plant here, I'm also triggering taste centers, I'm also triggering hearing centers, also touch centers, and most of that is actually happening without you even being consciously aware of it. And so all of the different senses are actually involved in the perception of anything that you see. So that's the perception part of it, kind of understanding the world around you. The other piece of it is actually kind of the decision making or the behavior part of it. And that's kind of where this amygdala aspect really comes into it. So our brains really evolved for the sole purpose of predicting the future, to avoid danger, to find food. And so as we take in information through those senses, we kind of cross-reference with what we know already in the past, our prior beliefs, prior memories. And then from there, also kind of pair it up to see that prior memory, do I tie it with a lot of goodness or a lot of not goodness, like bad, tied to what I want? And then from there, it goes to the frontal lobe. And in the frontal lobe, that's where you try to take probabilities from the past and decide whether or not kind of grabbing and eating the candy bar will actually make you feel really good or not. And then that goes to the actual motor parts of your brain that actually makes you take the action. Or simulates the motor action before you actually take it, which goes back to the sensory experience, but then loops back through to predict whether or not that's actually going to have a benefit. And that's constantly looping through over and over and over again. And as we experience the world, we're also taking in the information, not just what's outside, but also inside your body. So it's called interoception. You can call it like our bodily sensations. So anytime that you are kind of walking around or talking to people, all of those bodily sensations are kind of informing whether or not what you're experiencing is good or bad or whatever kind of emotion that you experience. Our emotions are actually those bodily sensations as we perceive them, and then we place a label over them. So things like anger and fear, thinking about like your heart rate increasing, your stomach turning, your muscles tensing, those are all kind of physical experiences, and we kind of grow up being programmed to believe that this is fear or this is anger, and so we interpret that ourselves. The only real kind of dimensions to think about that are pretty kind of standardized across people are the dimension of pleasure and pain, and the dimension of calmness and arousal, kind of being very excited. And all the other emotions are kind of a mix of those two dimensions. And it's like the goal is to be in that calm, pleasant zone.